They used my college fund to bail out my cousin. So I used their house and sold it for millions. The letter from the university still sat in its envelope, yellowing with time and thin at the edges from being opened, reread, and handled by fingers that had once trembled with elation. The acceptance had come with all the prestige I'd earned, years of top scores, leadership in clubs I didn't even like, volunteering in soup kitchens I had to walk 6 miles to get to, and summer jobs that wore the skin off my hands. Every late night studying with bloodshot eyes and caffeine-sharpened focus had pointed to that moment, to the promise that I would break the chain of mediocrity that shackled our bloodline like rusted links. But when the bursar's office called to say my tuition hadn't been paid, I thought it was a clerical error. I was so sure of the fund my grandparents had left, secure, protected, sacred, that I laughed on the phone. Then came the silence, the hold music, the flat tone of bureaucracy telling me what no one in my family had the decency to say. The money was gone. The confrontation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even private. My mother, halfway through folding laundry, looked up and said it like she was offering a warm bowl of soup. "We had to help your cousin. He was in real trouble." My father just nodded, his mouth pulled into that thin line he used whenever he didn't want to speak but wanted to seem involved. And as they talked, about loyalty, about family, about how Craig had always struggled and needed someone to throw him a lifeline, I felt something ancient and brittle inside me crack. No one asked how I felt. No one offered apologies. There was only the assumption that I would understand, that I would be proud, even of their decision to gut my future for a cousin who had once tried to sell fake concert tickets to my prom date. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. That would have granted them a power I refused to let them have. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness like poison with a smile and said, "It's fine." And then I began to rebuild, not from scratch, but from a foundation ruined by betrayal. I worked days in a diner where grease clung to my clothes like smoke, and nights cleaning office buildings that smelled of old paper and failed dreams. I took courses online with borrowed Wi-Fi and second-hand textbooks, learning how property flowed like currency in this country, how land, unlike people, didn't lie or pretend. That's when I remembered the house. Years ago, when my father had been sniffing around for tax breaks and clever ways to hide assets during a rough financial patch, he'd transferred the deed to the family home. Grandmother's old colonial nestled in the last nice part of a decaying suburb, into my name. Just paperwork, he'd told me. I was 17. I didn't understand the implications then, but I signed. They never transferred it back, and they forgot. But I didn't. By the time the housing market began its frenzied ascent, I had positioned myself with precision. I joined a small firm under a mentor who taught me the language of sharks: negotiation, leverage, exploitation dressed in etiquette. I shadowed inspections, sat through zoning hearings, and learned how to read people like open bids. Every time I looked at that house on county records, still neatly filed under my legal name, I felt a slow satisfaction bloom in my chest like frost melting under spring. They thought they were safe. They thought I had moved on. The call to the real estate agent was short. The paperwork flew through the system like wildfire. My name, my signature, my profit. I didn't visit the house during the process. I didn't need to. The inspectors went through with a checklist. The photographers came next, staging their life like a showroom. Then the buyers, a young tech couple who loved the neighborhood's charm, offered millions without haggling. I signed the deal over morning coffee in a downtown cafe where nobody knew my name but everyone respected my suit. The day the movers arrived was sunny. They were still in their pajamas when the doorbell rang, confusion coloring their expressions. My mother answered the door with rollers in her hair and eyes puffy from sleep. The movers, polite but firm, showed her the bill of sale. My father came out shouting, demanding explanations, but the papers were legal and the contract airtight. Their pleas bounced off the truth like raindrops off slate. I wasn't there to witness it. I didn't need to be. The image of their stunned faces, of boxes being packed by strangers while they scrambled to call lawyers who never answered, was enough. They called me that evening, left messages soaked in rage, confusion, grief. My mother cried, told me she didn't understand how I could do this to them. My father left voicemails filled with broken threats and fractured pride. My cousin, ever the parasite, tried to convince me to invest in his latest idea, a digital casino metaverse. I blocked them all, and now I sit on a glass balcony 30 stories above the city, a skyline wrapped in gold and ambition stretching out before me. My coffee is dark, rich, bitter, like the victory that simmers in my chest with every passing breeze. I'm enrolled in the same university that once waited for a check that never came. This time, tuition is paid in full. My name, my real, untainted, self-earned name, graces every document. There is no guilt, no hesitation, only the clarity that comes when you've been sharpened by injustice and molded by necessity. They sacrificed my future for someone who wouldn't have pissed on them if they were burning. I reclaimed what they forfeited, and then some. This chapter isn't about revenge, it's about correction, and I'm just getting started. The first week after the sale felt like a symphony of silence. Not a legal notice in sight, not a knock at my door, not even the faint rattle of chains disguised as family duty. I had expected more resistance, to be honest. I half imagined a cousin-shaped shadow waiting at my door, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling with faux sincerity. But it was as if the entire family collapsed into quiet exile, scattered and scrambling, too stunned to properly retaliate. And in that lull, I began to build. The high-rise wasn't just a home, it was a vantage point. From up here, the city looked like something I could rearrange at will, a grid of opportunity and misstep. I turned my penthouse into a command center. One corner had textbooks and legal pads, still tethered to the degree they'd once stolen from me. Another was for strategy, maps, listings, connections. The air was filled with the scent of roasted coffee and ambition. It was the first space I'd ever lived in, where I didn't have to share a wall with someone else's bad choices. I hadn't spoken to Craig in years. Not really. He was the kind of cousin whose presence lingered in family cookouts like the smell of burnt meat. Always scheming, always pitching some half-baked nonsense with buzzwords he barely understood. There'd been a vending machine scam back in high school. He'd claimed he could make passive income from machines stocked with energy drinks and nostalgia snacks. He collected cash from everyone, bought 2 units, and had them installed in a laundromat that closed a month later. No refunds. Just shrugs and muttered, "next times." Later there was the crypto phase. He'd taken to calling himself an investment strategist, flooding the family group chat with charts and emojis. For a brief and tragic 6 months, he even ran a podcast called Altcoin Convictions, where he mispronounced blockchain terms with the confidence of a preacher. The fact that he was the one they drained my college fund for felt like a mockery of everything I'd worked for. But it wasn't about him, not entirely. Craig was a symptom. My parents were the illness. Their choices had been deliberate, calculated in that lazy generational way that says blood matters more than merit. And worse, they had never asked for permission. So I'd stopped giving mine. I started attending university classes again, blending in with students a few years younger who carried less weight but more dreams. They wore lanyards with ID cards like dog tags, marched through lecture halls with earbuds and open laptops, and never once questioned how I'd come back. I kept my past behind the privacy glass of indifference. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to finish what had been stolen. One afternoon, in the middle of an economics lecture, my phone vibrated. A name I hadn't seen in a decade lit up the screen. Uncle Victor, my father's older brother, the only person in the family who'd ever spoken plainly, though he had a tongue like sandpaper and all the warmth of a graveyard. I let it ring out. Then he called again, and again. By the 5th call, I picked up. "You made your point," he said. No hello, no pleasantries. His voice sounded like it had been steeped in gravel. "I don't remember asking to make a point," I replied calmly, eyes still scanning my lecture notes. "You turned your folks out. That house was everything to your mother, and you threw it away like junk mail." "No," I corrected. "They threw me away. I just returned the favor, with interest." He was quiet for a second. Then, "You're going to burn every bridge, kid. There won't be anyone left." "Good," I said, and hung up. Let them call it bridge burning. I called it controlled demolition. They tried subtle first. A cousin I hadn't heard from since childhood added me on social media and started liking all my posts. Then an old neighbor messaged to ask if my parents were okay. I responded with nothing but a link to the property listing. They got bolder after that. Texts from my mother filled with guilt-laced words like family, understanding, and legacy. My father, more direct, simply wrote, "You've made your statement. Now give the house back." But I didn't. Couldn't. Because it was never theirs to begin with. And deep down, they knew it. What they hadn't anticipated was that I would know it too. I'd weaponized their oversight, their arrogance, their belief that I would never strike because I'd always been the good one. The one who said thank you when dismissed, the one who forgave too easily, swallowed too much. No longer. I funneled part of the proceeds into a shell company, just to keep things clean. Another portion went toward paying off my student loans before I ever signed a promissory note. The rest I invested into quiet, steady acquisitions, property that would never bear their names, partnerships where no one shared my blood. And yet, despite the distance, the silence, the legal clarity, a part of me still wondered what they were doing, where they were staying, if the couch they'd landed on belonged to someone equally oblivious to their past. That was the thing about people like my parents. They survived by latching onto the next source of comfort, never quite learning the lesson. I didn't doubt that someone would take them in, and I didn't care. One rainy evening, weeks after the sale, I stood in the glass corner of my living room watching water stream down the skyscraper's skin. Lights flickered below like artificial stars. I imagined them out there somewhere, fumbling with umbrellas, squinting through wet windshields, wondering how their safety net had frayed so violently. I poured a glass of tea and let the silence hang. This wasn't the end. This was reclamation. The first chapter of a life defined not by tragedy or theft, but by ruthless precision. They had gambled on my obedience. They bet everything that I would stay quiet. They lost. They showed up the morning of my final presentation. I had woken early, prepared with rehearsed lines etched into memory, and a tailored blazer that made me look more professor than student. The air buzzed with quiet confidence. The years had been long, but they had sharpened me into something leaner, faster, immune to guilt and forged in strategy. I had become exactly what the world respects, a person who acts rather than asks, who moves without explanation. My plan had been complete. The money was secure, the degree was within reach, the house was gone. But fate, ever entertained by unfinished business, decided to interrupt. I recognized the knock before I reached the door. It wasn't the kind that came from delivery drivers or neighbors asking for quiet. It was slow, familiar, and heavy. A rhythm etched into childhood memories. My father used to knock like that when I locked myself in my room as a kid. Always the same. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. As if the door would open for the beat, if not the man. When I pulled it open, both of them stood there, weathered and far smaller than I remembered. My father had shrunk, not physically, but in presence. There was a hollowness behind his eyes that hadn't existed the last time I saw him in pajamas yelling at movers. My mother wore too much makeup, the kind of rushed effort someone puts in to pretend things haven't unraveled. Behind them was a cab idling at the curb, the trunk still open, like they hadn't been sure I'd even answer. "We need to talk," my father said. No hello, no apology. I didn't move from the doorway. "You have 60 seconds. My mother blinked at the coldness. "You're our son," she whispered, like that word still held currency. "No," I corrected. "I was your investment, and you cashed me out." That shook them. For the first time, Hay seemed to understand there would be no soft landing. He shifted uncomfortably. "We know we made mistakes. Things got out of hand. Your cousin—" "Don't," I cut him off, stepping out and pulling the door shut behind me. "Don't mention his name. Not unless you want this to end now." Silence again, the kind that eats space and stretches time. "We've been staying with your aunt," my mother said eventually, avoiding my eyes. "But her place is small, and she's not thrilled about the arrangement. We thought maybe, just until we find somewhere." I laughed then. Not out of joy, not mockery, just disbelief. It was raw and sharp, like cold air slicing into lungs on a winter morning. "You thought I would let you in. After everything, you stole from me. You didn't just ruin plans, you erased years of effort and spat on the ashes. You expect a handout now?" My father clenched his jaw. "We're not asking for much, just some help." "Alone. Alone," I echoed, savoring the word like it was foreign. I could have crushed them then, pushed every detail of my triumph into their faces, told them about the properties I owned, the account balances that would silence most financial advisors. I could have reminded them that they lost a child not to drugs or distance, but to their own choices. But I didn't need to. They saw it already. In the high-rise, in the suit, in the locked door behind me. I stepped closer, voice low and final. You used to say family was everything. That blood mattered. So, where's Craig now? They looked at each other, the guilt immediate. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father's hands, once fists at his sides, now just hung there, useless. He's in Florida, my mother mumbled. Doing real estate. Of course he is. I smiled without warmth. Let him help you. And with that, I walked back inside and closed the door. The click of the lock wasn't loud, but to me, it was a bell of liberation. They didn't call again. That night, after the presentation, which I delivered flawlessly, earning praise from faculty and students alike, I stood on my balcony, sparkling water in hand, and watched the city blink beneath me. The degree was mine. The wealth was mine. The choices now belonged to me. I didn't hate them anymore. That emotion required investment, and I was done offering my soul as collateral. Instead, I let go. I had outgrown the narrative they tried to write for me. I had erased their chapter and replaced it with my own. A story not of revenge, but reclamation. I wasn't just the boy whose future had been stolen. I was the man who built a new one from the wreckage. The cousin they saved with my dreams would always chase shortcuts. They could keep him. I had no need for bridges anymore, because I built kingdoms.